Who better to talk to on grand final eve than Richmond legend Kevin Bartlett, one of the greatest finals players in history. He was a short, scrawny kid who couldn't touch his toes, but he blossomed into one of the game's legends, playing a then record 403 games for the all-powerful Richmond. KB, as he is universally known, was a final specialist and played in 5 premierships from 7 grand finals for the Tigers between 1967 and 1980.
Bartlett now turning in towards goal kick. And another Richmond goal comes up. It's raining goal. Here's Bartlett coming into an open goal. Drives into all of them. He's still going, Bartlett. Still a little quickly. Here comes the Bartlett. This will be a goal. No doubt about this one at all. Kevin Bartlett lines up.
Kevin, welcome to Open Mic.
Thank you, Michael.
It's a magnificent career, mate. You should be proud of it.
Well, I'm very contented with my playing career. I enjoyed playing. I played with great players, had a great time at the Richmond Football Club and had a great coach. In fact, I had several great coaches. And it was nice to, be a premiership player and to do something that you loved all of your life.
Lots of great memories, obviously, over such a long period. 5 premierships, best and fairest in 3 of those. Now, I think Lee Matthews is the only other player ever to have won best and fairest in 3 premiership years. Team success obviously takes precedence, but it must be nice to know that you were the best player in the best team.
Well, I think when you win a club best and fairest, it's always nice because that's your club, and you hope that you're doing things on the playing field that the coach likes or the selectors like. But at the same time, I think the main thing though is you want to be the best you can, and whenever you played. And there was never a game I went out and played that I didn't have a vision of being the best player on the ground. Even in my last game when I was absolutely stuffed, I still had this vision in my last game. I was going to go out, be the best player on the ground and maybe kick 5 or 6 goals and, be a great day.
In fact, did you not do your knee in your last game?
No, I actually tore my thigh muscle at training a couple of days before my last game, which was a bit unusual. And maybe that's why I was getting old. And I did ask the club doctor to give me a jab to get through training. So I was able to just get through training and got a jab on the last day and ran about half time when the jab wore off. So did I. I was playing on a young Richard Osborne, who is blonde hair and about 6 foot and ran like the wind.
Run,
and jumped over tall buildings in a single bound. And I'm trying to keep up with him.
They say reputations are made in September. Did you ever get nervous? Do you remember being nervous before, say, your first final or your first grand final?
I wasn't a nervous footballer. I never felt nervous prior to a game. I like to be calm all the time, particularly when I was playing. I never tried to get into too much hype before the game. A lot of players, yelling and screaming and frothing at the mouth and, doing exercises and running up and down and punching balls in the air and crashing into everyone. I didn't like that. I like to just sit down. I used to like to try and play the game over in my mind all the time, just thinking about, from the centre bounce, taking the tap, beating an opponent, running with the ball. I suppose a bit of imagery, which, and it was amazing the number of times that, you would sit there and sort of just imagine what was going to take place in the game and you knew who you were playing against. How that sometimes when you went out on the field, it actually happened that way. Now, whether or not it gave you confidence, but I used to like to feel really, really calm before I played.
Perhaps it was those fish and chips on Friday nights, was it?
Fish and chips were beautiful.
Is that fact
or
fiction that you had fish and chips every Friday night before you played?
No, that's fact. That's fact. Every Friday night. One, it was cheap. I couldn't afford too much more than that. And you didn't have to wash the dishes, of course, and the leftovers could go to the dog at the same time.
Very practical, kid. When you arrived at Richmond, you were only young, I think 16 or 17. What were your physical dimensions?
Well, when I first arrived, I first arrived around about 62 to play in the fourths, which was the under 17. So I was about 14 at the time. So I could have weighed. I was about jockey size then, probably weighed 9 stone or something like that, I imagine. By the time I got into the under 19s, played with them when I was 15 or so. I was probably 9'7" or something like that. And by the time I played my first game, I reckon I would have been about 10 stone. So that probably very early in the 60 kg, something like that.
And what did you finish at? I finished 1 gram heavier, were you?
No, I finished around about 74, 75 kgs.
Did you ever venture into the gym, or in fact, did Richmond have a gym?
I didn't. Well, someone told me they did, but I don't remember ever seeing a gym down at Richmond. No, in actual fact, football clubs in those days were pretty amateurish, And whilst Richmond may have had a few odd weights, but that's about it. They didn't have a gymnasium as to speak of. But I did used to go to the gym a lot, particularly at lunchtimes. I used to work with PMG in those days, and Telecom and Telstra's. They've changed the names over the years. And Sid McRae, who was the head trainer at Richmond, used to run the police gymnasium up in Russell Street. And I used to go up there at lunchtimes and train with Sid McRae and lift weights. And that's where I ran into Alan Jeans, because Alan Jeans used to train every lunchtime with Sid McRae. They used to wrestle, as they used to call it in those days, and throw a dirty, great big medicine ball. And I used to sort of watch him do that, and I'd be there, lifting a few dumbbells that, Sid McRae got me to do. And also Stan Nichols ran a big gymnasium in town as well. And a number of the young Richmond players, myself and Royce Hart, Kevin Sheedy, we used to go down to the Stan Nichols gym and train a lot during the off season as well. But down at the club, there wasn't too many weights.
Kevin Sheedy wrote in your book, KB, A Life in Football, that you had calves the size of rock melons. You never had hamstring problems.
No.
But you couldn't touch your toes either, could you? So explain that to us.
Well, look, I don't know about hamstrings. They're a mystery to everyone. But I can remember, teammates of mine, going out onto the ground, and they'd put their leg up on top of the old wire fence there at Punt Road, and then they'd bring their head down and touch themselves on the knee. Now, I couldn't even actually get my leg up onto the wire fence, and I couldn't get within about 18 inches of touching my toes. So I don't know about hamstrings in terms of flexibility. I think it's probably the strength of the hamstrings. I never had really a soft tissue injury really in my life, whether it was hamstring or calf or. Probably until the last week of my life when I actually tore a bit of a thigh muscle.
But you did have explosive pace, and now the conventional wisdom is that for someone who's so quick off the mark, you're vulnerable to sort of calves and the thighs and the hamstrings. Never occurred to you?
Never, no, never. I never used to do a lot of the exercises that the players did. I used to hate that stuff before a game when, they'd get all the players, and as I say, frothing at the mouth, but then they'd lay players down on the ground and they'd grab them by the leg and they had to push their leg back over the top of their head, and you'd sit on the ground and a bloke would walk around behind you and start pushing you back. Well, I was probably so inflexible that just gave me great pain. So I didn't bother with that. When the side used to warm up doing that, I used to just sit in the corner, or, I used to like to run on the spot a lot, do a bit of skipping and things of that nature. To me, that was warming up. I didn't want to be stretching muscles that people said to me, we've got to do some groin stretches. And I said, well, I don't expect to be doing the splits.
You were a very good runner in your own right. Did you win on the professional sprinting circuit?
I won the double at the Portland, and also won at Broadford, and second in the Maryborough GIF,
So they were, 110 metre sprints?
In those days, 130 yards. And the sprint was 75, and then the GIF was 130,
You played with lots of football immortals, and they are genuine stars of the game. Hart, Burke, Barrett, Clay, Stewart, lots more. Who was the best of them, Kevin?
Royce Hart is probably the best player I think I've ever seen. Royce was a magnificent player for Richmond, and I played with him week in and week out. And the old story, our style of play was kick it long to Royce and get out of his way, and that's all we had to do. And we won 4 premierships just with that very, very simple game plan. But he was a magnificent mark and used to float across in front of the packs. He was very, very quick for his size. He was only about 6'1.5" too, Royce. It's not like the big centre-half forwards of today. But he was a great chaser, a great tackler. He was tremendous on the ground. He never fumbled. He was a beautiful kick, and he was a great competitor.
Let's compare Royce at his best, say late 60s, early 70s, and Wayne Carey at his best.
Well, I think Royce is the greatest centre-half forward of all time. The others will come and go, but I still think because I played with him week in and week out, and I think it was fitting that when they picked the centenary team of the century, that a lot of people, for many, many years, and when I was a kid growing up, Teddy Whitten was the greatest player of all time, Mr. Football, and he was a champion centre-half forward. When they came to the AFL's team of the century, they picked Royce at centre-half forward, and Teddy was named at centre-half back. And I think that if you can knock Teddy Whitten out of the centre-half forward spot, you have to be pretty damn good.
I agree with that. You were finally made captain at the age of 32, and yet you lasted only 12 months.
Yep.
Why so late and why so short?
Well, that's an interesting one. I'd won the best and fairest in 73 and 74 back-to-back premiership wins, and I won the best and fairest those years. In 75, I had just a reasonable season in 75. I may have finished top 4 in the best and fairest or something like that, but not as good as the previous 2 years. And we lost in the preliminary final that year, I think, to North Melbourne. Royce, I'd captained the side a lot over that period of time between 73 and 74 because Royce had some knee problems at that stage and missed, a great percentage of some games. And I was captain of the side, and I was vice captain with Royce probably for 4 years, I suppose. He was named captain, and I was named vice captain after Roger Dean, relinquished the captaincy. And I just actually expected to be captain when in 1976, when Royce, with his injuries, they decided that Royce no longer, was going to be fit enough to actually be captain because he hadn't really played as much or consistency as he had been over the previous 2 years. But they named, not only did they not name me as captain, they didn't even name me as vice captain, which was something that made me grow up a lot too, matured me a lot too, because, in those periods of time, there's a lot of people wandering around, patting you on the back all the time, saying, if you play well today, we'll win this game, and only you can win the game for us, and we can't win this final without you, and, we'll only win the grand final if you can play at your best, and all those sorts of things. So it sort of matured me a little bit. I thought maybe it was my first understanding that there's double speak in football and there's a lot of bullshitting in football.
After the break, things don't get much better for KB. He was shifted from his treasured Rovers position to a half-forward flank and decided he wanted to move to Collingwood.
Pass out from Sheedy, finds over Kevin Bartlett, the mark. Who's he looking for down there? Found Bartlett, who's even busier.
More, Barn gets the knock down to Bartlett. Great play by Barn then. Bartlett streaking.
Did it prompt you to consider an offer from Essendon?
Not then, no, definitely not then. I just gritted my teeth and didn't say anything to anyone at that particular point in time. No one said to me why I wasn't appointed captain. There was no explanation given. I think Francis was appointed captain. Great player and deservedly captain as well. And I think Neil Balme was appointed as vice captain. But there was no reason given to me whatsoever. As that was probably what took place in those days. I mean, you just turned up and played, and boards and coaches and chairman selectors made decisions, and there was no need to explain. It was just the decision, and the idea was all we want you to do is go and concentrate on your football.
Now, despite your genial appearance, you can get stubborn and you can get offended by decisions made around you. Did you think then perhaps that you might sort of try to engineer a way out of Punt Road?
Not then, no, not then, because I just accepted that as a kick in the backside. And then I think the next year I think I came third in the best and fairest. The next year I won the best and fairest. The next year I came second in the best and fairest. So it didn't stop me from actually, focusing on what I loved doing, and that was playing. In 1979, I was appointed captain. Tony Jewell took over as coach. We changed captains pretty regularly too, by the way.
And coaches.
And Kevin Sheedy had been captain, and then Kevin was stood down as captain, and then I was asked, would I take over the captaincy, because in fact Barry Richardson, when he took over in 1977, came to me and said, when Kevin was captain, would I accept the vice captaincy role again, and because he probably knew there was a bit of angst or heartburn from several years prior, and I said yes, I would. I was happy to be vice captain under Kevin because he's a great friend and a great player and he's a great Richmond person. So I said yes, of course I would, and I took it as an honour. And then when Kevin, they decided Kevin was finished, then they asked me to be the captain. So I captained in 1979. And then at the end of 1979, what had happened then was I'd been roving right up to that period of time. So for 15 years I'd just been roving, and then out of the blue, all of a sudden I was told I was no longer roving. No explanation given, but just no longer roving, and you'd be played on the half-forward flank.
That was Tony Jewell's call as coach?
Well, Tony was coach at the time, yeah.
And was his call?
Well, I don't know. No one ever said whose call it was.
We had Robert Wiley, Barry Rawlings, Dale Wakeman and Jeff Rains, which we wanted to rotate through the centre. Plus KB really didn't have a defensive mentality, and sides were getting smart about using his opponent when the ball went into our forward line. His opponent would just peel off and they'd use him on the way out. And KB being KB, just intent on trying to kick a goal, or that his whole mindset was attacking. So we decided that we just rove him on the forward line. He just had freedom on the forward line to go where he liked, and we knew then that there'd be a defender on him all the time, and they wouldn't take the risk of using that bloke to run the ball out as much, and they didn't. They just sat on him. And we rotated those other 4 players to the centre. And it worked well. It worked very well for Kevin, of course, and it worked well for the rest of us.
But the funny thing about that was, I think at the time I remember that you were probably a bit miffed that the great Rover had been told that his future, whatever it was, at 33 years of age, lay on a half-forward flank.
Yeah.
And yet in the finals that year, 3 finals, 21 goals, Norm Smith medal.
That was that turned out to be the following year, of course. We're in 1979 when that first took place. A lot of things were different back then, as you know. You got named in the paper at full-back, you played at full-back, you named at centre-half-back, you played at centre-half-back. If you were first rover, you were first rover. In the centre, you were centreman. So there was a bit of kudos and prestige, and, you know, players tried to be the best they could in those particular positions. And if you were, you get, you know, picked in the Victorian side and you'd play at centre-half-back and full-back, and so forth. And the half-forward flank in those days was a little bit different than maybe playing these days, where everyone's on the ball. It was sort of like, there's your little spot of ground over there, you stand there and don't get in the way, and, you know, graveyard, I think they used to call it, half-forward flank. So anyway, but in 1979, after I was told, well, I was selected, not told, just, you know, selected as the half-forward flanker, I can remember going out to Waverley, and as I was walking in, Rob Asbury, who was the leading... He was the Mike Sheehan of the day. Can you believe that? He was not quite as good as you.
I was around there.
Yeah, but he was breaking all the big stories. You're only learning to break the big stories back then. And he collared me as I was walking into Waverley, and he said to me, it's going to be a big day for you today. I said, why is that? He said, well, it's your last game. And I said, is it really? He said, yes. He said, I've been told that this is going to be your last game. And, you know, that sort of... I gritted my teeth. Now, that sort of got me a bit fired up.
You're party to conspiracy theories. In your book, KB, you talked about a senior journalist who was being fed stuff from Punt Road to sort of virtue to undermine you. Is that a fair assessment?
That's true, yeah.
So are you suggesting someone like Graham Richmond was telling someone like Rob Asbury this sort of stuff?
That's my take on it, yes. That's my take on it. I mean, that's what I thought was taking place at that stage, that the club wanted me out. And
why so?
Well, people just come to decisions. They make decisions what they believe is best for the club at that particular point in time, rightly or wrongly. If you've got enough power, it happens. You know, Francis Burke finished up before the end of the season. Royce Hart finished up before the end of the season.
Kevin Sheedy.
Dick Clay finished up before the end of the season. Kevin Sheedy finished up before the end of the season. So there's no problems with Kevin Bartlett finishing up before the end of the season as well. But because he told me that as I walked into the ground, that sort of really got me fired up. And I kicked 4 goals that day playing on the half-forward flank. So it was probably a bit hard to drop me the following week. So I was able to see out the season. So when I saw out the season, I thought, look, if you're not required, I've had a great time here, I've enjoyed it immensely, then I'll move on, because I still wanted to play, because I love playing. And I thought, well, if I didn't want to be one of those players that they just shoved out when they felt they wanted to shove you out the door. And I felt that was the case. So as a result, I would just resign. And so I went to him and I said, look, I'm resigning, I'm leaving, because I genuinely believe that the hierarchy at the Richmond Football Club don't want me here. And I can accept that. I said, so if I can accept it, then obviously you can accept it, and therefore I will go, I'd like to play elsewhere. Of course they said, well, oh no, that's not the case, no, we think very highly of you, and you know, etc, 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 and all those sorts of platitudes. But I didn't believe them, because I've seen other things take place in the past, and you know, I just felt that I could see the signs, the very, very strong signs were there. So as a result, I actually wanted to go and play at Collingwood, because Tommy had gone to Collingwood, and I love Tommy, and that's what I wanted to do. And I had a lot of meetings with Tommy and also Ronnie Richards, who was chairman of selectors at the time, about going to Collingwood and playing at Collingwood. And Ronnie was really keen. I mean, and I was keen. Tommy was the sticking stone. He was a bit concerned about, you know, taking me away from Richmond, whether or not, if we look back in years to come, whether we'd both regret it, you know, that I should be a one-team player, how it was going to look in the eyes of people with, you know, Tommy pinching me and taking me to Collingwood.
I just thought it'd be terrible if he was to leave right now. He's been there for, say, 350, 80 games or something like that. and really he's upset with a couple of people there, and probably would be better for him to be a one team player. And I just felt it wouldn't be the right thing.
We're talking, you were going into your 33rd year at the time, right?
Yeah. So I was really fired up, and Stewie rang me, and he was keen for me to go to, play at South Melbourne with Stewie. I met with Big Carl. Carl was coaching Melbourne at the time. He was keen for me, still to come and play, because I just wanted to play. And Barry Davis was coach of Essendon at the time, and I spoke to Barry, went out and saw Barry, and had a good chat to Barry. And Alan McGilvray was out there. He was their sort of recruiter at that stage, and I sort of warmed to Essendon with the Collingwood deal, sort of with Tommy not wanting me to go to Collingwood. So I said, look, I'll sign a heads of agreement, and if I'll go to Essendon if I leave Richmond at that stage. And that's what I was still, I suppose, in the back of my mind kept thinking I really wanted to go to Collingwood, but with that shutting, I did the heads of agreement.
So what reconciled you with Richmond?
Well, Tommy really, when I said to Tommy that, look, I think I'll go and play at Essendon now, and he said, look, I don't think that's great. I think I'd love you to play at Collingwood, but I still think you may regret that if you look back in time and leave the Tigers. Whereas I think if you stay at Richmond, put your head down, forget about everyone else that's there, do what you like doing, play the best you can, and see if you can get the best out of yourself. So Michael Green, who is my great friend and great ruckman and premiership ruckman, I got him to go back to the Tigers, and he brokered the deal for me to come back. And at one stage there, they said to me they would have me back and I'd be captain. But I told them I did not want to be captain of the club because I didn't think they respected the captain of the Richmond Football Club.
Coming up shortly, Bartlett talks about his stellar 1980 final series and a fad called handball.
Pass out from Sheedy, finds over Kevin Bartlett, the mark. Who's he looking for down there? Found Bartlett, who's even busier.
There's more. Barn gets the knock down to Bartlett. Great play by Barn then. Bartlett streaking down.
Grand final day 1980, probably the high point of your career, was it?
Well, it was one of the great moments because we won the premiership.
Yeah, I mean, you're 33, you've had this magnificent final series and won the Norm Smith medal. Doesn't get any better than that, does it?
No, look, it was a terrific final series. We played Carlton it was my 337th game. I broke the league record that day at Carlton. It was at Waverley in the very first final. I think they called it the elimination final in those days, or qualifying final, probably qualifying. And so it was a sort of a record-breaking game, Dave. Johnny Rantel held the record at 336 and I was playing 337, and I kicked 6 goals that day, 3 in the first quarter, which sort of gave me a great buzz at that particular point of time. And then we played Geelong in the second semi, and I was able to kick 8 goals that day against Geelong in the second semi, and then that led us into the grand final, and against Collingwood, which Tommy was coaching. And it was a great day for the club. It was a great day for Tony Jewell, who did a magnificent job in coaching the Tigers, and like a lot of Richmond coaches, should never have been sacked, but that's another story.
For goal number 7, what's the result it is? He's up for the record. Well, there he is, the little champ himself, the Hazel, is equaling the record, 7 goals in the grand final. Pat on the back to little Kevin Bartlett, equaling the most number of goals kicked in a grand final, kicking 7 today, and also breaking. There he is on screen now, and a great guy.
The winner of the Norm Smith medal for 1980 is Kevin Bartlett.
But as it was, the little germ kicked 7 goals in the grand final, didn't he? But I put it down as a moral victory for us. He would have kicked 7 goals for us. We would have won by 3 points instead of getting beaten by 81 points.
Tom Hafey is probably your best mate. He coached the Tigers for 11 years, won 4 premierships, contested 7 final series, never finished lower than 7th, and got the flick.
Correct.
What was going on at that place at that time?
Well, I think that's after, and I mentioned to you before when I was, no one mentioned anything to me about the captaincy in 1975, after the 75 season. And then Tommy, of course, lasted 1 more year at the end of 1976 Tommy was appointed as coach, but he resigned a couple of weeks later. He actually was appointed as coach, but he knew he didn't have the backing of Graham Richmond, and therefore he felt that it was no point in continuing as being coach of Richmond if in fact Graham wanted him out. Graham had been trying to get Tommy out. He'd been going around to close friends and confidants of Tommy, particularly his brothers, and telling his brothers that they should have a chat to Tommy about resigning and giving it away. And as a result, finally, Tommy thought after being appointed that there was no point coaching Richmond if you didn't have the support of Graham. So Tommy actually resigned, and that was a pretty sad day. I can remember Tommy ringing me at home and telling me that he was going to resign the next day, and I was really shocked. And I tried to talk him out of it at that stage, saying, "Listen, the players love you, Tommy. We play for you, and don't worry about anyone else. And if they don't want you, but we'll play for you and we'll have success." But Tommy's pretty dogged and single-minded himself. And when he felt that he didn't have the full support, and particularly of Graham, then he felt then he would move away, and that shocked us all.
An amazingly powerful figure, Graham Richmond. I mean, probably from the outside, we knew he used to run the footy club. I mean, and my understanding of the Hayfie decision was that GR was allowed Hayfie to win the vote, but actually voted against him himself so that the word would get out that he didn't have GR support. Is that
well,
correct?
I don't know the workings of it, but all I do know is that he didn't support Tommy to be the coach of the Richmond Football Club. Now, and I suppose that's where I become very wary of Graham myself. And my relationship with Graham was always a bit icy. Very friendly. I mean, we're friendly to each other, and we would talk to each other. And when he was ill in hospital, I went and saw him in hospital because I respected him enormously. But I was very, very wary of him. And as a result, he realised that, and I told him that in meetings we had in 1979, when I said a lot of things appearing in the paper that Kevin Bartlett's had it and he should be gone or should be retired and things of that nature. I remember Graham saying to me, "Where do you think all that's coming from?" I said, "It's coming from you." That's where it's coming from, Graham, because no one else at the club had the power to do that. And Graham knew all the journos in those days. I mean, Graham, worked the media magnificently.
If we were to compare the Kevin Bartlett of the 60s and 70s with a contemporary player, I mean, off the top of my head, I'm thinking like Brent Harvey. Would he be? Would you see a similarity?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, a little rover, buzzing around.
Cheeky.
Yeah, probably cheeky.
Loved a goal.
Loves a goal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Doesn't hand pass a lot.
More than me. More than me.
403 games, 778 goals, one known hand pass. You didn't enjoy it much, did you, the handball?
No, it was a fad, it was a craze. It was never going to last. And Tommy told me that once. He said, "Whatever you do, don't get involved in this handball craze, it'll never last." And I always did as the coach told me, Michael. But when I was a kid growing up, I mean, you see handball now, I mean, everyone's handball crazy, of course. But when I was a kid growing up, following the Bulldogs, if anyone handballed on the back line, they used to get booed. In fact, it was an absolute no-no if anyone handballed on the back line. So it's amazing how football has changed over the years from, being you'd only handball the last resort, as a kid growing up, to now, of course, it's nearly the first option now.
Yet in your book, every Scanlon's footy card has got you handballing. Who taught you how to do that?
Well, but you never saw the fist actually touch the leather.
No. A serious note about the handball. I know it's become a bit of a myth, but did any of your blokes, your teammates, think that you were selfish? Think that it was always you were prepared to take a hand pass, but you never prepared to give one?
I don't think so, to be quite honest. I like to think I got on pretty well with all my teammates. We had, I think, a pretty good relationship. I never thought about it, to be perfectly honest, but they have a bit of fun with me over the years and rib me from time to time. But I only just tried to do my best, and the coach was pretty adamant. In those days. See, when we first started off again, if you have a look at Alan Bull Richardson, was our ruck rover, and he was like our handballing.
Matthew's father.
Yeah, Matthew's father, and he was given the job first of all by Len Smith, and then Tommy took it on as well, where he was going to be that chunky bloke running around the ground, handballing out to people. Well, he probably had 10 handballs a game, so he was a handballing genius. And I think when we won grand finals in 67 or 69, there was probably 30 handballs for the game. So whilst I was having no handballs, most of my teammates were having one or two, because the idea was, Tommy loved it, to kick the ball long to an advantage. to, you know, either the key forwards, which was either Royce Hart or Paddy Ganane or, you know, Neil Baum. And then, you know, the players in between to run really hard and get up there, and so that when they contested, you know, vigorously, that you'd be at the bottom of the pack and you'd be then picking up the crumb, and then you'd belt the ball down again and you'd swarm down again. Probably it's a little bit like the modern game, of course, where you kept pressing up all the time. But we didn't do it so much with handball. There was a little bit of handball, but mainly it was a kicking game. And Tommy, you know, built the Richmond style on Norm Smith. He loved Norm Smith as a coach. He loved Norm Smith. He loved the way Melbourne played, you know, on the MCG, you know, kick the ball long, big Bob Johnson down the goal square. He loved that sort of football. And that's where I think Tommy got his inspiration from.
When we return, KB reveals the other clubs that wanted him as coach and the appalling conditions at Punt Road when he was appointed as coach of Richmond in 1988.
Pass out from Sheedy, finds over Kevin Bartlett, the mark. Who's he looking for down there? Found Bartlett, who's even busier.
There's more. Baum gets the knock down to Bartlett. Great play by Baum then. Bartlett streaking down.
Kev, you seem born to coach. You had a spell in the media. You took the Richmond job on in 1988. You took over a wooden spoon team, one that finished behind the Brisbane Bears in their first year, and then it ended in tears, didn't it?
Well, it was a very difficult time. I'd had opportunities to coach a couple of other clubs where I'd been approached at different stages, and I showed interest, and I went and spoke to a couple of clubs, and there was a couple of teams that indicated that all I had to do was sign on the dotted line and I'd be their coach.
And they're called?
Oh, there was Fitzroy was one club, Melbourne was another club. I know the Bulldogs spoke to me at one stage, but you know, I had to, you know, probably could have coached by just signing on the dotted line. But I suppose, Michael, that I've always been a Richmond person, you know, apart from when I barracked for the Bulldogs as a kid, and Richmond was my club. So if I was going to coach, I suppose my heart had to be in it, you know, in terms of who I was coaching, and therefore the opportunity came. I got a phone call from Richard Doggett, and he said to me that Tony Jewell was going to retire. He wanted to give up coaching and he wanted to move into another aspect of football, recruiting, developing, whatever it was. And, you know, would I be interested in coaching the Tigers? And I said I would be interested in coaching the Tigers. So I went down and had a chat to the Richmond Football Club. They organised a meeting with the board, and I went down there and I met them. And they were talking about, you know, it was about 6 or 7 weeks out from the end of the season of that year, 19 whatever it was, and 1987 I think it was, and they said to me that, you know, Tony was thinking of giving it up, and I said, look, you know, who knows, if you finish the season off well, Tony might get excited again about the prospects of coaching. And because I said, look, the club's not on the bottom because Tony Jewell's can't coach. Tony Jewell's a premiership coach. I mean, you can't get a better recommendation than that. So I said, look, if you see out the season and things don't finish up the way Tony wants them to, and he doesn't want to coach, well, I said, well, obviously I'll be interested. But under no circumstances am I going to put my hand up and try and undermine Tony Jewell as coach. I don't want to do that. If Tony doesn't want to coach, then come and see me. But if he wants to coach and he finishes the season off well, fantastic. Don't worry about it. Anyway, they came back and said, no, Tony's definitely doesn't want to coach. So I was appointed coach of the Tigers. And I remember saying to him that we're not on the bottom because the coach is no good. We're on the bottom because obviously we haven't got enough good players, because I'm smart enough to know that you need good players, you know, to win games. And if you want to win premierships, you might need some great players as well. So I said to him, you know, we'll have to be in that position to actually go out like Richmond once was able to and recruit, you know, when Richmond went and got Robbie McGee's and, you know, Gareth Andrews and David Thorpe's and Stephen Ray's and Paul Sprouse. You know, Richmond was able to go out and recruit and attract people to come to the club. And they said, yes, that's not a problem. By the time I started coaching, here I am being told that we're over $1 million in debt. And it never got any better. I mean, when I went down to the change rooms, and there was hooks hanging off the roof, but there was nothing on them. So I had to go out with my own money. I went out to Buffalo Sports and I bought the punching bags, and I bought the punching balls, and I put them up myself. Went out there, connected them all up. Phil Grant, who was Peter Grant's brother, who was the runner for us in 1980. Phil was great. He had a bit of a sports business going, and he'd bring down some gloves, and we looked at the weights, and there was no weights, there was a bar, but only one weights for one end. So he hunted around, got some weights for me, and it was sort of I mean, the club was obviously absolutely broke. Cloak left and Rains left and Brian Woods left and BT left.
27 wins from that 4-year period, and I think you invested so much time and so much emotion that there was no question you got bitter when you got the sack.
Well, I was disappointed because we all knew how tough it was and the situation that I was in, that they were dishonest with me in the first place by telling me that, you know, we probably had a future and we had the ability to go out and get players. We'd go along to the draft, and I was told we weren't allowed to draft players. In terms of, there was pre-season drafts in those days and there was mid-season drafts as well. And some good players came up. I remember Derek Kickett had left North Melbourne and he was available. Now, Derek Kickett, as we know, was a great player over in South Australia and turned out to be a terrific player, wonderful player. But I could have picked him, but I wasn't allowed to pick him because, you know, in those days he might have wanted, you know, $60,000 or $70,000, and we had no money. We couldn't pay to get him. You know, we couldn't go and get a Tim Pekin, who finished up a terrific player, you know, for Fitzroy, and Craig McGrath, I think, was a big centre-half forward, could have helped.
That's right.
I remember I spoke to Russell Morris, who loved Richmond as a kid. His dad was a great Richmond supporter. Russell was, but, you know, St Kilda offered him 4 times more than what we could offer. So, you know, we were sort of, you know, we just had no ammunition. We just couldn't attract anybody. We had no money to attract anybody. We were not successful. And so I knew that everyone understood the difficulties that I was facing, and I understood the difficulties that they were facing. People would come to me and say, listen, who can we drop off the list? Who can we get rid of? The banks are knocking on our door.
You did harbour the grudge for a long time, did you not?
Well, I was disappointed. 16 years.
That's a long time.
It's a fair time, isn't it? 16 years. Look, I never ever went to any other club or bagged for any other club. I never caused the club any trouble. I never tried to join any board to unseat anybody. I got approached by a lot of people, you know, to factions who said, you know, let's get rid of this board. Can you join us? Can you know, be part of us, be a spokesperson, get rid of this mob, you know, we can move in, we can do a better job. Over the years, that happened to me on several occasions. People would ring up and say, endorse me as being a candidate, come with me, or do you want to... I even got offered jobs down at the club, you know, be the football manager or general manager. I mean, people, you know, made inquiries, and I said I don't want to have anything to do with it because I had completely walked away from the club. My disappointment was that after I'd been at the club for some 26 and a half years, and these 4 years that I felt were really, really tough, that Richmond had a reputation of just sacking coaches. And then we all start again, we all have a big smile on our face, you know. Next year, invite them down to the first game, give them a free lunch, get them up, say a few words, pat them on the head, all's forgotten. All the tough decisions at Richmond, they thought making tough decisions, in my opinion, was sacking the coach. And that's why, you know, you've got Tommy Hafer after his great reign. He had to resign because he didn't have the support. Now, how could you not have the support if you're Tommy Hafer? Barry Richardson takes over, coaches for 2 years, makes the finals and gets sacked. He's replaced by Tony Jewell, coaches 3 years, wins the premiership, gets sacked. Takes over by Francis Burke, coaches 2 years, makes the grand final, gets sacked. Replaced by Mike Patterson, who lasts 1 year and gets the sack. Paul Sproul comes in. Even Barry Richardson, as president of the club, had to sack himself because he gave Paul Sproul his word that he'd coached for 2 years, and after 1 year the board said, no, we're going to sack him.
Wouldn't they love that problem now, sacking blokes who have taken to the finals?
It's unbelievable. So when that happened to me, I thought, you know what, I don't want to be part of this Richmond game where you just sack players and sack coaches and then invite them to the first game of the year and then we just continue on. And I thought, you know what, at some stage someone has to make a stand and say, you know what, the way you go about doing things is completely wrong. Now, after 26 years of being at the club, started there when I was 14, the under-17s, and finished as coach, all added up to about 26 years. I thought, after 26 years, if the board of the Richmond Football Club, after 4 tough years, can't get you together and sit down at the end of the season and say, listen, what's the strengths? What's the weaknesses? How do you think you've gone? How have we gone? You know, what can we do about it? How can we overcome this problem? Then we can sit down and we can discuss it. How's your enthusiasm? You're up to do it again, vice versa. The pros and cons. They could be critical of me, I could be critical of them, and we could work out. And it may well be that, look, you're not going to be the man for us. Okay, well and good. But in my particular case, no one spoke to me after the last game of the year. Virtually no one spoke to me for about the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season. In fact, I actually asked on several times to speak to the board, and I was told it wasn't necessary. Here I am, with bits and pieces appearing in the paper all the time saying, Bartlett's position's in jeopardy, could be sacked, what's happening down at Tigerland. I get a knock on the door at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm told I'm no longer coach. And 2 hours later, Alan Jeans is appointed coach of Richmond. Now, I thought, look, after 26 years, if that's the way they treat people, I will just step away. And that's what I did for 16 years.
You now are a host on Radio SEN's Hungry for Sport, an official legend of the game and the driving force on the Laws of the Game panel, which actually drives most of us crazy. What are you blokes doing? Why do you need to change the game as much as you do?
Well, I think the game always needs checks and balances because it's changing all the time. From the days that we've been talking, Michael, it was just an amateur game, and now it's fully professional, of course, and players, bigger, faster, stronger, down the club 6 days a week, and all the coaches are down there and they're all working out all wonderful things, and the game has changed, and you would know this too as the chief football writer for so many years, that you can see the game, and coaches of course always coach to win games, so they'll cheat, they'll always cheat and try and bend rules and things of this nature. I think it's even greater now because of all the time they've got, and they've got all these minds around them. In the old days, if I was coach, you're probably the only bloke there, and you have a couple of guys helping you as chairman of selectors and a few guys as selectors as well. But these days, you've got 6 or 7 coaches, and you've got sports science people, all those sorts of people, all out there trying to work out how they can bend the rules. And in many cases, the game has changed in terms of the safety for the player and also the aesthetics of the game in the terms of 36 players being in one corner of the ground, which never was the aspects of the game.
Why, though, in the simplest way I can put this is, why is there so much confusion on the terraces and in the grandstands? From people who have watched football for their life, and they are not sure when a free kick is paid, why a certain other free kick or decision...
I'm not quite certain about that, Michael. I think if you ask people what do they think about Australian rules football today, they say, it's a great game.
Of course it's a great game. That's not the issue.
It's a great game.
There's confusion. People who should know more about...
What confuses you, Michael?
Well, so many decisions that are made and not made.
We
look at each other and sort of say, why wasn't that a free kick? Or why was that a free kick?
One of the problems I do think is caused by the media, because I think a lot of people in the media have never read the rule book. And as a result, they actually commentate on games and they make comments on games, and they actually agitate the viewer and the person who's listening by saying, well, that's a disgrace, that shouldn't be a free kick, the game's heading in the wrong direction, and therefore people take this in and absorb it. But in actual fact, they don't know the rules. So
Do the coaches know the rules?
No, not necessarily. No, they don't.
Did you answer the question about which game you would prefer, the modern one or the one you played in?
I like the modern game. I like the modern game, but I like the modern game more this year than other years.
Because of the return of the marking contest?
Well, there's some of that, but I think that the interchange and the sub-rule, the 3 interchange and the sub-rule, has, particularly as the game has progressed, has enabled the game to open up more. Clubs jump up and down, they tell us their players are more fatigued all the time. Our game, Michael, is getting to the stage where it's one of those rare games where you're not allowed to get tired anymore. And it annoys me that people talk about, players, they've got to come off, they've got to have a break, they've got to have a rest, because you can't get tired playing AFL football anymore. You can't put your hands, you can't bend over and put your hands on your knees, you can't take a deep breath. As soon as you get a knock now, Michael, you've got to come off straight away. You can't even absorb the knock on the ground. So that's the modern game, and I accept that. But I like the idea of the game opening up a little bit, and I like seeing better players out there on the ground, strutting their stuff.
You're still calling football on radio, and you're still watching it with the same enthusiasm you had. Which 1 or 2 or 3 players do you get excited about when you know you're calling their games?
Now? Gary Ablett, Chris Judd, I think are fantastic players. Play under enormous pressure week in and week out. Play at this enormously high level. Rarely play a bad game. And I've been watching, Gary Ablett up on the Gold Coast. When he went there, a lot of people, I think Robert Walls even wrote an article saying that, Chris Judd is a greater player than, say, Ablett, because he was able to go to Carlton and carry him on his shoulders and make Carlton into something and as a leader. I think that Gary Ablett has surprised a lot of people with the way he's gone to the Gold Coast and single-handedly continue to play at this enormous level, taking on that responsibility. I think it's been one of the great years that he has played football. I'm a big admirer of Gary Ablett's. I love watching Buddy Franklin. I think he's one of the most exciting players I've ever seen. Tremendous excitement before the ball even gets to him. You know, there's an anticipation about Franklin. You know, he's not such a great mark as such. He doesn't really take screamers, but he's bounding. He's got a strut about him. You know, he struts around and he takes off and he's explosive, and you know, he kicks goals. And I've called games when he's had 15 and 16 shots on goal. You know, so he's terrific to watch. And Cyril Rioli is an exceptional player to watch. You know, he reminds me so much of Morris. You know, he's so quick, you know, with his reflexes and his actions, and he's probably quicker than what Morris was, but he's still got those reflex actions that Morris had, you know, the zigzag, going one direction, change direction. Very, very exciting players to watch.
Kevin, it's been a fantastic journey. I know it's not over yet, but I just want to say we've enjoyed every moment of it, even when you were throwing the ball out in front of you and conning those free kicks.
In fact, I'm trying to get that back in as a rule. Trying very hard. It's hard to convince Adrian Anderson and the rest of the board, but I think that's a winner.
Great to see you, Kev.
Thanks, Michael.
Go to the back of the Bartlett going for another first down. This time it's right.
This has been a Fox Sports production.